When we're putting programs together, it's really important that we don't just look at our data, or we don't just look at the game. We look inside the game or inside our data. So what I'd like to talk about here is the concept of training for the most demanding passages of play, the worst case scenario. And this is critical whether we're a physical therapist or whether we're a coach or whether we're a strength and conditioning coach. What I've done is put together a little schematic of high-speed running that occurs in a team sport activity. Now, this doesn't have to be, it could be any sport that you choose. But what I've done here is plotted all of the different activities that you will see across the course of your season. From off-season break, rehab, practice or skills activity, match play, right through to the most intense passages of play. And I've drawn a red line through the average demands of competition. Now, the first thing you can see here is that if we have an athlete in rehab, the amount of high-speed running that they can do in rehab is obviously going to be a lot lower than what we require them to do when they compete. We can't do high-speed running if we have an athlete with a hamstring injury. We have to give that tissue time to heal. But it's really important that while we may be having one eye on biological healing, we also have to have the other eye looking at what we're getting that athlete back for. Because the demands of rehab are a long way away from the demands of match play, the average demands of match play. And they're a mile away from the most demanding passage of play, the worst case scenario. Now, up here, for the most demanding passage of play, this is where a lot of our strength and conditioning staff will sit. They look at these demands and they think, what have I got to prepare this athlete for? What's the worst case scenario or the most demanding passage of play that my athlete has to be able to perform during competition? I need to prepare my athlete for that. So they're looking at this, trying to develop physically tough training activities to prepare the athletes for that. It's really important though, that if you're a physical therapist or an athletic trainer, that you're looking forward to this most demanding passage of play. What are you actually getting that athlete back for? You need to look forward. And from a strength and conditioning perspective, you need to look back at where the athlete has come from. If the athlete has come from the basement, then yes, they need to be able to handle what the game dictates at the ceiling, but you might have to do it in steps. The most successful programs are when the physical therapy and athletic training staff are communicating with the strength and conditioning staff, and the strength and conditioning staff are also communicating back. The medical team are looking forward, the strength and conditioning staff are looking back. When we have that, we give our athletes the best chance of returning to play and returning to play safely. Now, to give you an idea of, or an example of a worst case scenario or a most demanding passage of play for a sport, I've chosen rugby. Now we can look at the sprinting demands of rugby and you can see that on average for different positional groups, players will do around 30 to 40 individual sprints within a game. But again, if we look inside that information, we can tease out the most demanding passages of play. Now, we were always told in rugby that repeated sprinting was really important. But if you look at the repeated sprint demands of rugby match play, on average, each player will only perform one repeated sprint bout across the course of a game. So yes, they have to do repeated sprinting, but they don't happen very commonly. If we compare that with repeated effort activity, now repeated efforts are the sprints with short recovery, but also the efforts that involve contact, collisions, wrestling, grappling with very short recovery. On average, players have to do 9 to 10 bouts within a game. Now there's a couple of key points here that unless you look for these most demanding passages of play, if you're just training for the average demands, then it's highly likely your players will be underprepared for the worst case scenario. The second point I'd like you to take away is that if you're just training repeated sprint ability for a sport like rugby, then chances are your athletes are going to be underprepared for the most demanding repeated effort demands of competition. So when you're putting your programs together, don't just focus on the average demands. Don't just look at the game. Try and look inside it and look for those peak passages of play that are highly demanding, because if you train for the average demands, it's highly likely your athletes will be underprepared for these worst case scenarios.